We're going to start off this unit talking about functions, domain, and range. And one of the best ways to introduce ourselves to this idea is to think about a pop machine. Let's look at these three pop machines down here. I have one that gives us Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper, water, root beer. That seems pretty normal. I have this one here. One button gives Pepsi, another button gives Mountain Dew, another button gives us Pepsi, and then two buttons give us water. And that makes sense. You see on pop machines that sometimes they'll have 2 or 3 buttons for the same beverage if it's a very popular one. Now this one over here, this button gives us Pepsi. This button gives us Pepsi and water. Button for Dr. Pepper, another button for water, and then another button for root beer. So this machine doesn't make sense because we can press this button here and we get Pepsi or water or Pepsi and water. It's not very clear. So let's see which one does not make sense. The last one. Because one button gives us 2 drinks. Now the first two, these two are perfectly normal. These are called functions because each button will give us exactly 1 drink. Yes, on the second one, we have 2 buttons that gives us Pepsi, but each button only gives us 1 drink. This third one is not a function because 1 button can give us 2 drinks. Not a function. And then we can fill in the definition. A function is a relation where every input or button press has exactly 1 output. And in this case, it was our beverage. Notice there's nothing in here about having 2 different inputs have the same output. And like I said, right here we have 2 different inputs having the same output. We have 2 buttons for water, and that is okay. 2 more terms that we're going to talk about are domain and range. Domain is your input values. And in our example from the pop machine, it's the button presses. And our range is our output values, which would be the beverage that we receive from pushing the button. If we connect this to algebra, the domain is your x values, and the range is your y values. And the easy way that I tell kids to remember this is to look at the first letter. We have D for domain, goes with x values, and range goes with y values. Between D and R, between these two, the letter D comes first, and between these two, the letter X comes first. So the domain goes with X values, range goes with Y values. Now, let's look at this table here, and we're going to make up an example, and I'm going to do some inputs, -2, 0, 3, 7, 12, and our output will be these values here. And I'm just making this up, so that's where we're getting these numbers from. Domain is going to be our input values. So our domain, so we write this weird little bracket, and then we're going to list our values, -2, 0, 3, 7, and 12. And then our range will be the output values. So -7, 1, 5, 7, 13. So again, output goes with range, input goes with domain. All right, let's look at the next page. We can tell if a graph is a function by something called the vertical line test. And the vertical line test is exactly what it sounds like. If you draw a vertical line anywhere and you touch the graph at two different spots, then that graph is not a function. It doesn't matter if at some point you can draw a vertical line to only touch once. If there is any line that touches a graph at 2 points, it is not a function. And these down here that are functions, you can draw a vertical line anywhere, and you will only touch at exactly 1 point. So these two below are functions. And to connect that with the algebra, if we look at this x value here, x equals 2, it has two different y values. So algebraically, if an x value has two different y values, then it is not a function. Notice that the opposite could be true. We could have two x values have the same y value, but it's very important that an x value cannot have two different y values. So in the examples down here, we're going to determine if the relation is a function or not and explain, and then determine the domain and range of the function. So let's look at this. We have our domain is our x value, so I'm just going to underline all these x values. And we have -2, 0, 4, 5. And then our range is going to be our y values. 3, 7, -9, and 8. Now, what I look for when I'm doing this is, are any x values repeated? And in this case, no x values are repeated. So is it a function? Yes. There are no repeated x values. If we look over here, I'll underline my input or my x values. And I'm still going to write the domain and range on this. So the domain, 1, 2, 2, 4. So I already see that an input or x value is repeated. So that tells me that this won't be a function, but we'll get to that in a second. Because we have, this is repeated, it is not a function. And the reason is the input value of 2 appears more than once. We have two 2's here in the input, so that means it is not a function. Oh, I guess you could have written the domain and range down there. I didn't see it at the time. It's okay. Let's look at the last one. This fails the vertical line test right here and right here. So this is not a function, fails the vertical line test. Now, when we list the domain and range, this is going to be a little bit different because this is a graph and not just a set of numbers. If you look at the x value, so your domain, look at, you have all these x values. We go from 3 all the way to 7, and it would be impossible to write down every single number from 3 to 7. So what we do is we use a bracket. We say 3, 7. What this means, and we'll write it in, that every number from 3 to 7. And the brackets means that 3 and 7 are included. So including 3 and 7. Now, if it's not included, we'll talk about that later on. There are going to be some instances where the numbers that we write are not going to be included, and it's written a little bit differently. Now let's talk about the range, or the y values. Our smallest y value is 1, and the y values go all the way up to 5. So we would write 1, 5, and put the brackets around that. All right, that's it for the notes today. We're going to practice this in class, so make sure you hit the like button.